Gothic cathedrals' perfect twin spires are a declaration of war against chaos. This is the mystery of symmetry, an ancient builder's quest for perfect design that defined an entire age. By the end of this journey, you will hold the key to seeing the medieval world not as a dark age, but as a realm illuminated by brilliant mathematical light. We will uncover why master masons risked everything to encode sacred numbers into stone, and how a simple compass could chart a path to the divine. What hidden order do you sense in the oldest structures around you? This profound definition of symmetry was the bedrock of their entire world. For the master masons and their patrons, a symmetrical design was not merely beautiful. It was a direct echo of the universe's own architecture. They inherited this idea from a powerful lineage of thought, reaching back to the Greek philosopher Pythagoras, who declared that all reality was built upon number and harmony. His follower Plato took this further, envisioning a perfect world of pure forms and geometric ideals, of which our own world was but a flawed reflection. This was not dry philosophy to a medieval thinker. It was a breathtaking revelation. It meant that the chaos they saw in nature, in society, in their own lives, was not the final word. Underneath it all lay a perfect divine order, and the key to unlocking it was mathematics. Early Christian scholars like St. Augustine eagerly wove these Greek ideas into their faith. For Augustine, the symmetry and proportion found in creation were the very handwriting of God, a language written into the fabric of reality for humanity to decipher. A perfectly proportioned building, therefore, did more than shelter a congregation. It performed a sacred translation. It took the invisible, perfect harmony of the heavens and gave it a visible, tangible form on earth. Every balanced arch, every repeated window, every vault that mirrored another became a kind of prayer made solid. This transformed the act of construction into something far greater than engineering. It became a theological act, a collaborative project with the divine to bring a slice of celestial order down into the messy, unpredictable realm of humanity. Think of it this way: we might look at a blueprint today and see lines, measurements, and materials. A medieval master builder looked at the same lines and saw a diagram of virtue. They believed moral truth had a shape, and that shape was symmetrical. Justice was balanced, harmony was virtuous, discord was sin. So when they laid out the plan for a cathedral with perfect geometric proportions, they were not just making a stable building. They were constructing an argument for a better world, a physical model of heavenly peace intended to guide the souls of all who entered. This foundational belief set the stage for everything that followed. It explains why they would pursue perfect alignment with such obsessive dedication, often at staggering cost and over generations. They were not just building walls. They were building a bridge, stone by carefully measured stone, from a world of shadows into a world of light. And to walk across that bridge, they needed a map. That map was not written in words, but in a simple, profound tool that fit in the palm of your hand. That map was drawn not with ink, but with iron and wood. The master builder's most trusted tools were deceptively simple: a compass for drawing perfect circles and a straight edge for drawing flawless lines. With these, they could inscribe the entire vocabulary of sacred geometry onto a tracing floor, a flat surface of plaster where the grand design was worked out in full scale. The circle came first, drawn from a single, central point. This was the symbol of divine unity, of God's infinite and eternal nature. From this one perfect shape, all others could be derived. By marking points along its circumference and connecting them with the straight edge, they could generate the square, representing the earthly realm with its four cardinal directions, and the triangle, symbolizing the Holy Trinity. These were not arbitrary choices. They believed these were the very shapes God used as a template for creation itself. To build with them was to participate in that original, divine act. The most potent shape born from this process was the vesica piscis, the almond shape created where two circles of equal size overlap. You have seen this shape countless times, though you may not have known its name. It frames the figures of Christ and the Virgin Mary in countless medieval paintings and stained glass windows. Most importantly, it often forms the very outline of a cathedral's main doorway. To step through that portal was to literally pass through a geometric symbol of creation, the intersection where the circle of heaven met the circle of earth. You were crossing a threshold built from first principles. This sacred geometry provided a fixed, universal language in a world before standardized measurements. A builder in France and a builder in England, who might never meet or speak the same dialect, could both understand a plan based on the proportions of a square inscribed within a circle. It was a system that ensured harmony because it was rooted in something beyond human whim. The dimensions of a chapel might be derived from the diagonal of a square, its vaulting heights determined by triangles drawn within circles. Every arch, every aisle, every window's proportion was a note in a mathematical hymn. A silent resonance with an order they believed was woven into the fabric of reality. The building itself became a tuned instrument, designed to align the human soul with a celestial harmony we can no longer hear, but which they felt in their bones. But this language of geometry needed a grammar, a set of rules to give it meaning and music. That grammar was proportion. If the circle and square provided the sacred alphabet, then specific mathematical ratios dictated how those letters were combined into words, sentences, and ultimately, poetry in stone. The master builders were not just geometers, they were cosmic composers, and their most revered composition was based on a single, elusive ratio. You may know it as the golden ratio, a proportion where a line is divided so that the smaller part is to the larger part as the larger part is to the whole. It creates a relationship that the human eye finds inherently pleasing, a balance between symmetry and surprise. In the medieval world, this was not a mere mathematical curiosity. It was called the divine proportion, and they believed it was the very fingerprint of the Creator, visible in the spiral of a seashell, the arrangement of petals on a flower, and the branching of veins in a leaf. To embed this ratio into a cathedral was to weave the pattern of life itself into its walls. They often approximated this perfect ratio using a sequence of numbers discovered centuries earlier, a pattern where each number is the sum of the two before it. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and so on. This sequence manifests in nature with astonishing regularity, and the medieval builders saw it as a numerical echo of divine growth, a blueprint for organic perfection. So they used it as a practical guide. The width of a nave might relate to the length of the choir in this proportion. The height of a great window might be 1.618 times its width. The tiers of a bell tower might ascend in steps that followed the sacred sequence. These choices were not arbitrary aesthetic whims. They were calculated, deliberate acts of resonance. The builders believed that by structuring space according to these universal proportions, they were tuning their building like a musical instrument to vibrate in harmony with creation itself. When you stand in the nave of a great Gothic cathedral, that overwhelming sense of uplift, that feeling of being drawn both upward and forward simultaneously, is not an accident of architecture. It is often the direct result of this meticulous proportional choreography. The columns are not just tall, their height is in a specific, harmonious relationship to their thickness and their spacing. The arches are not just wide, their curve is derived from intersecting circles whose radii follow the divine mathematics. This pursuit of proportional perfection transformed a chaotic, muddy construction site into something extraordinary. Amidst the dust and din, the shouts of laborers and the groan of ropes, the master mason would consult his compass and his straightedge, his eyes seeing not just stone and mortar, but the invisible lines of a celestial grid. Every stone carved, every arch raised, was an act of alignment with an order far greater than the day's labor. It was a workshop where heaven's blueprint was slowly, painstakingly made manifest on earth. And this profound belief in a mathematically ordered universe did not stop at the cathedral walls. It spilled out into the very landscape, aiming to connect earth with heaven on a scale we can barely comprehend today. Yet this celestial blueprint was useless without a human hand to bring it to life. The master mason stood at the very center of this sacred endeavor, a figure shrouded in equal parts stone, dust, and mystery. He was far more than a foreman. He was the living bridge between the unseen perfection of the divine plan and the gritty, imperfect reality of the construction site. To his team of carvers, setters, and laborers, he was the undisputed master of a secret craft. His knowledge was a closely guarded treasure, protected by the guild system that regulated the trade. This was not mere job protection. It was a sacred trust. The principles of sacred geometry and structural stability were passed down not through public books, but through whispered lessons, hands-on apprenticeships, and intricate, full-scale drawings etched into plaster floors known as tracing floors. These tracings were the true blueprints, containing the complex geometric secrets of arches, vaults, and window tracery. After a section was built, the tracing was often destroyed to protect the guild's intellectual property. The master mason carried the cathedral's entire design in his mind, and in these ephemeral drawings, a walking library of architectural wisdom, his authority was absolute. With a glance, he could identify a poorly cut stone. With a gesture, he could correct the angle of a rising wall. He held the sole responsibility for translating those perfect circles and squares from the tracing floor into a three-dimensional mountain of stone that could defy gravity for centuries. This required a mind that blended the precision of a mathematician with the intuition of an artist. He had to calculate loads and stresses long before the science of engineering had a name, understanding through experience and inherited rules how to make stone float on air in the form of a vault. To the common people of the age, such knowledge seemed almost supernatural. How could a man with simple tools command stone to soar so high? How could he ensure that a structure taking decades to build would remain perfectly aligned? This lent the master mason an aura of the mystic. He was seen not just as a builder, but as an interpreter, a man who could read the hidden language of the universe and write it in limestone and granite. His role was a profound spiritual responsibility. Every decision he made, from the proportion of a pillar to the placement of a keystone, was judged not only by its structural soundness, but by its fidelity to the harmonic vision. A mistake was not merely a construction error. It was a discordant note in the silent hymn the building was meant to sing. He worked for a patron, a bishop, or a wealthy abbot, but he answered to a higher authority. The geometric truth he believed was authored by God himself. In his calloused hands, the quest for perfect symmetry found its human heartbeat, a testament to skill, secrecy, and an unwavering faith that human hands could indeed touch the divine. This profound vision of the builder reached its ultimate expression in the finished cathedral itself. It was never meant to be just a building. It was designed to be a map of the entire cosmos, a perfect model of the universe in stone and light. The most common shape for this cosmic map was the cross. When you look down from above, the floor plan of a great medieval cathedral forms a vast, symmetrical cross. This was no accident of design. It was a profound symbolic act, literally inscribing the central story of Christian faith, one of sacrifice and redemption, onto the very earth. To walk from the west entrance toward the high altar in the east was to retrace a symbolic journey, moving from the darkness of worldly life into the illuminated promise of salvation. Every step a worshipper took was along a path charged with meaning, a physical pilgrimage contained within the walls. This alignment was precise and deliberate. The vast majority of these cathedrals were oriented on an east-west axis, with the altar at the eastern end. This was not merely for tradition, it was a direct tether to the heavens. The builders calculated the angle so that on the feast day of the saint to whom the cathedral was dedicated, the rising sun would stream directly through the east-facing windows, flooding the altar in a blaze of golden light. In that breathtaking moment, architecture, astronomy, and faith fused into a single experience. The cycle of the sun, a celestial clock, was harnessed to mark sacred time, proving that the order of the heavens and the order of the church were one and the same. The building became a giant sundial and a calendar, its stones silently marking the passage of holy days, but the cosmic mapping worked vertically as well. Look up inside the nave. Your eye is drawn irresistibly upward along the lines of towering columns and ribbed vaults, toward windows that seem to float in a haze of colored light. This soaring verticality was a deliberate assault on the senses, a physical expression of the soul's aspiration toward heaven. It creates a feeling of sublime lift, as if the very stone is straining upward in prayer. Yet this incredible height is perfectly balanced by the strong horizontal arms of the transepts, the crossbar of the great stone cross. This creates a spatial symmetry that is both grounding and elevating. You feel simultaneously held within the embrace of the earth and drawn toward the infinite. This was the master mason's genius. He mapped the entire spiritual journey onto the space you inhabit. The long nave represents the path of earthly life. The crossing where the nave meets the transepts represents the moment of decision or transformation. The sanctuary around the altar represents the divine presence. You do not just hear about this journey, you walk it with your own feet, you feel it in the scale of the space around you. The cathedral was a machine for transcendence, using symmetry, proportion, and light to guide the worshipper from the chaos of the outer world into a perfect, ordered inner universe, a silent stone hymn to the belief that humanity and all of creation was part of a magnificent, intelligible, and beautifully designed whole. But this cosmic map was not built for angels alone. It was built for us, for the human form standing at its very center. The master builders saw in the human body the ultimate expression of God's symmetrical design, a living blueprint for the world they sought to create in stone. Long before Leonardo da Vinci's famous drawing, the principles of the so-called Vitruvian man were understood in practice. They believed the human form, with its 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, and balanced halves, was a perfect microcosm of the divine order. To build in harmony with the body was to build in harmony with creation itself. This principle of bilateral symmetry, the mirroring of left and right, became a powerful tool to make divine principles feel familiar, intuitive, and profoundly welcoming. You can see this logic everywhere once you know to look for it. Consider the classic monastic cloister, a square garden courtyard surrounded by covered walkways. Its design is a serene reflection of the human quest for inner peace, with the open space at its heart representing the soul, perfectly balanced and sheltered by the structured arcades on all sides. It is a built environment for contemplation, modeled on the ideal of a centered, symmetrical self. But this idea moved far beyond peaceful gardens. Look at the formidable facade of a medieval castle gatehouse. Its design is not merely about defense. 2 towering, identical structures flank a central entrance, creating a powerful, imposing presence. This is the human form translated into fortress architecture. The twin towers are like broad shoulders. The arched gateway is the welcoming yet guarded heart. It communicates strength, stability, and a clear, ordered authority to anyone who approaches. This symmetry sent an immediate, wordless message. It said this place is strong because it is ordered. It is formidable because it is balanced. You are entering a realm governed by law and structure, not chaos. This was the genius of applying the human model. It created an instant, visceral understanding. You did not need to be a scholar of sacred geometry to feel the rightness of a symmetrical entrance. Your own body recognized the logic. You have two sides. The building has two sides. This mirroring created a subconscious bridge, making the grand, divine architecture feel accessible and strangely personal. This principle shaped spaces meant for community and ceremony too. The great hall of a manor, with its central hearth and opposing rows of tables, organized social life around a core axis of warmth and shared sustenance. Even in the layout of entire towns, the main street often acted as a spine, with key buildings placed in balanced relation to it, giving the settlement a discernible, legible form. The builders were not just stacking stone, they were crafting an embodied experience. They used the universal template of the human form to create spaces that felt inherently right, spaces that nurtured a sense of place, purpose, and belonging. In doing so, they achieved something remarkable. They took the lofty, invisible mathematics of the cosmos and anchored it in the most familiar thing we know, our own reflection. The quest for perfect design was ultimately a search for our own perfect place within the grand design. Yet this human-centered design spoke a silent language, one built not of words but of numbers. For the medieval mind, numbers were far more than quantities. They were the very essence of things, each one vibrating with its own symbolic power and symmetrical meaning. To walk through a cathedral was to move through a living book of sacred numerology, a scripture written in geometry and light. The most pervasive of these numbers was 3, the perfect symbol of the Holy Trinity. You see it in the triple portals of a grand western facade, inviting the faithful to enter through a trinity of doors. You find it in the delicate tracery of a trefoil arch, its 3 lobes a constant visual echo of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You feel it in the very structure of the building, often rising in 3 distinct tiers, from the solid earthly arcade to the airy triforium gallery, and finally to the celestial realm of the clerestory windows. This repetition was not decorative. It was a form of architectural prayer, a way of saturating the space with the foundational mystery of their faith. If 3 pointed heavenward, the number 4 firmly anchored the design to the earth. It represented the created world, the 4 seasons, the 4 cardinal directions, the 4 classical elements. This symbolism found form in the serene square of a cloister garden, a perfect earthly paradise enclosed for contemplation. It defined the cruciform plan itself, the 4 arms of the stone cross reaching out to sanctify the world in all directions. The square, as a shape, was the emblem of stability and the material realm, the necessary foundation upon which the spiritual aspirations of the triangle could rise. Then came the number 12, the number of the apostles, the tribes of Israel, the gates of the heavenly Jerusalem. This number often governed the chorus of supports within the sacred space. You might find 12 massive columns defining the nave, each one silently representing a pillar of the faith. A great rose window might be divided into 12 radiating sections, transforming light itself into a symbol of apostolic witness. By encoding these numbers into the fabric of the building, the master builders wove a dense layer of theological narrative directly into the architecture. A literate person of the time could read a cathedral's floor plan and elevations like a theological text, understanding the story it told about the relationship between heaven and earth, time and eternity. This numerical coding created a profound, multi-layered experience. A worshipper did not just see a beautiful window, they saw a pattern of 12 and were reminded of the community of saints. They did not just pass through a doorway, they passed through a triad and were enveloped in the mystery of the divine. The building became an instructor, its silent stones teaching doctrine through shape and number. This belief in the power of numerical symmetry reveals a world where the physical and the spiritual were inseparable. The right number in the right place was not just good design, it was a moral and spiritual necessity, a way of ensuring the building itself was in a state of grace, perfectly aligned with the hidden arithmetic of the cosmos. And this alignment reached its most breathtaking expression not in solid stone, but in the very absence of it, in the spaces where light was invited to become the primary building material. There is perhaps no better place to witness this silent symphony of number and form than in the crowning glory of the Gothic cathedral, the rose window. It is not merely a window, it is a universe in miniature, a breathtaking fusion of radial symmetry, sacred geometry, and divine light. To stand before it is to see the master mason's entire philosophy crystallized into one radiant, circular poem. Its design always begins at the center, a single point from which all creation flows. This focal point was often reserved for an image of Christ, the Virgin Mary, or the Lamb of God, establishing the theological heart from which all meaning radiates outward. From this sacred center, the stone tracery unfolds in a complex, mathematically precise web, forming petal-like lobes and intricate patterns that gave the window its name, the heavenly rose. This was more than a floral metaphor. In medieval symbolism, the rose represented perfect love and divine mystery, its layered petals hinting at the unfathomable depths of the sacred. The window's circular form also echoed the wheel of fortune, a reminder of the turning cycles of life and destiny, all held within the steady, unmoving gaze of the divine center. But this stunning beauty served a brilliantly practical purpose. The radiating stone arms of the tracery acted as a structural skeleton, a delicate yet immensely strong stone web that could support the enormous weight of the glass while allowing the wall around it to soar to impossible heights. It was a perfect marriage of engineering and art where the quest for light demanded a geometry of absolute strength. The true magic, however, happened when sunlight poured through. The colored glass transformed that steady celestial light into a dynamic, living spectacle. The symmetry was no longer static, it became a performance. As the sun moved across the sky, beams of ruby, sapphire, and emerald light would slowly pivot and slide across the stone floor of the nave, painting the interior with a moving mosaic of sacred narratives. Scenes from scripture, images of saints and prophets, all rendered in glass, were illuminated from behind, glowing with an otherworldly life. In this ever-changing play of light and color, the architects achieved their ultimate goal. They made the invisible visible. The perfect, unchanging symmetry of the stone frame held within it a dance of ephemeral, colored light, a perfect metaphor for how they saw the world, a stable, divinely ordered structure filled with the beautiful, transient drama of human existence. The rose window was their final, triumphant argument. It proved that through perfect geometric design, stone could be made to dissolve into light, and light could be made to tell an eternal story. The radiant promise of the rose window could only be fulfilled by a revolution in stone. Those soaring walls of colored glass defied an ancient law of architecture, the simple truth that a solid wall is what holds a roof up. To replace stone with glass was to flirt with catastrophic collapse. The medieval builder's breathtaking solution was to turn symmetry into a structural skeleton, transforming a spiritual ideal into a physical force. This was the fourth principle, symmetry as structural ingenuity. It began with the problem of the vault. The grand, arched stone ceilings of a cathedral generate immense outward thrust, a powerful sideways force pushing against the walls. An unsupported wall bearing this load must be thick and solid, leaving little room for windows. The Gothic master masons cracked this puzzle with a brilliantly symmetrical idea, the ribbed vault. Imagine 4 arches springing from 4 corner pillars, meeting at a central point high above. Then, stone ribs are built along the curved lines between them, creating a lightweight stone web. The genius was in the distribution. The weight of the entire ceiling is no longer spread across a wall, but channeled precisely down those ribs to the 4 supporting pillars. Because the vault is perfectly symmetrical, the thrust is equal in all directions, balanced like a tense, harmonious chord. This balance was the key. It meant the walls between the pillars were freed from their load-bearing duty. They could be hollowed out, replaced with vast windows, becoming not walls of stone, but walls of light. But the story of forces did not end there. That balanced thrust from the vaults was still pushing outward on the tops of the pillars. To keep the entire structure from slowly splaying apart, the builders invented one of the most elegant tools in architectural history, the flying buttress. These are the graceful stone arcs that leap like frozen lightning from the outer pillars to massive exterior piers. They work in mirrored pairs, a left and a right for each vault bay, creating a visible exoskeleton of strength. Their function is a masterpiece of redirected force. They catch the outward thrust from the high vaults and channel it down through their own curve into the solid ground. Look at a cathedral from the outside, and you see this silent conversation of forces made visible. The soaring verticals of the walls are answered by the sloping arcs of the buttresses. The upward reach of the spires is countered by the downward push of the stone piers. Every element has its symmetrical partner. Every thrust meets an equal and opposite counter thrust. This was not hidden engineering. It was proudly displayed, a lacework of stone that confessed how the miracle was achieved. The quest for luminous, vertical space demanded a geometry of incredible resilience. In solving it, the builders proved that their most beautiful ideals, symmetry and light, were not at odds with stability. They were its very source. The cathedral stood not in spite of its fragility, but because of its perfect, balanced tension, a stone hymn held aloft by the invisible mathematics of equal and opposing forces. Yet within this breathtaking symphony of stone, a single, quiet note seems out of place. Look closely at the western facade of a great cathedral, and you might notice something unexpected. Its 2 majestic towers are not identical twins. One may rise just a little taller or wear a slightly different crown of ornament. This is not a mistake you have discovered. It is a deliberate whisper in the language of perfection, a testament to the profound humanity behind the divine ambition. These hidden asymmetries are the quiet counterpoint to the grand geometric hymn, and they tell a story just as compelling as the quest for flawless form. The most common reason is beautifully, frustratingly human: time. These cathedrals were not built in a single lifetime or even a single century. Construction could span 300 years or more, passing through the hands of multiple master masons, each with his own vision, and funded by generations of patrons whose resources ebbed and flowed like the tides. The South Tower might be completed in an era of great prosperity and confidence, while its northern sibling was begun decades later, after a famine or a conflict had drained the treasury. The builders of the second tower were not copying a frozen blueprint. They were continuing a living tradition, often adapting the design with the newer techniques and aesthetic tastes of their own age. The result is a conversation across centuries, stone speaking to stone in slightly different dialects. In other cases, the asymmetry was born from the stubborn reality of the earth itself. Foundations settled unevenly over the decades, causing one side of the structure to sink a few critical inches. The later builders, faced with this tilting canvas, had to adjust their plans to correct the visual line, creating a tower that appears perfectly straight to the eye because its base is cleverly compensating for the land's gentle sigh. This was not a failure of geometry, but its triumph, applied as a remedy for an imperfect world. But some scholars propose a more intriguing possibility. Could these flaws be intentional, woven into the sacred fabric for a symbolic purpose? In a worldview that saw the cathedral as a mirror of heaven, the inclusion of a single, subtle imperfection might have served as a humble acknowledgement. It was a way for the builders to say, only God creates perfect unity. Our work, however inspired, remains human. This small asymmetry became a signature of humility, a built-in reminder that the path to the divine is walked with human feet on shifting ground. There is an even more fascinating idea rooted in ancient folk belief, the concept of the apotropaic mark, a deliberate flaw meant to confuse and ward off evil spirits or misfortune. The logic was that perfection was alluring not just to humans but to malevolent forces as well. A perfectly symmetrical portal might invite the envy of dark energies. By introducing a single, almost imperceptible irregularity, a crooked line in the tracery or a mismatched carving, the builders could symbolically break that dangerous perfection, creating a spiritual labyrinth to trap or repel any ill intent. Whether this was a conscious act or a later interpretation, it speaks to a deep, lived understanding that the world was a place of both celestial order and unseen chaos. These subtle flaws do not diminish the cathedrals, they complete them. They add a layer of poignant humanity to the staggering ambition, a reminder that these mountains of stone were raised by hands that grew tired, by communities that knew hardship, by minds that wrestled with the limits of their material and their mortality. The quest was not for a sterile, abstract perfection, but for a living harmony that could encompass both the ideal and the real, the divine blueprint and the human story. In the end, the cathedral stands not as a monument to an impossible standard, but as a breathtaking record of a centuries-long conversation between heaven and earth, a conversation that included moments of sublime alignment and gentle, correcting grace. Yet even the most profound traditions are transformed when they encounter another way of seeing. The European master builder's compass, tracing perfect circles for the divine, was not the only tool mapping cosmic order. A different, dazzlingly intricate geometry was flourishing to the south and east, one that would quietly seep into the medieval world and expand its very definition of symmetry. This was the influence of Islamic and Eastern design, a conversation across cultures that unfolded not only in grand diplomatic halls, but in the bustling markets of traded goods and the quiet study of translated manuscripts. The medieval quest for perfect design was never a closed system. It was a living dialogue enriched by encounters along the Silk Road and the fraught pathways of the Crusades, where warriors and traders alike brought back more than stories. They brought new visions of beauty encoded in pattern. Islamic art, guided by a religious principle that avoided figurative representation of the divine, turned instead to the limitless possibilities of abstract geometry and flowing calligraphy. Here, symmetry was not just a reflection of cosmic order, it was a gateway to the infinite. Artisans developed breathtakingly complex tessellations, interlocking stars, polygons, and floral vines that could repeat perfectly across a vast surface without beginning or end. These were not mere decorations, they were profound philosophical statements, visual representations of a universe without center or edge, endlessly created by a single, unifying source. The arabesque, with its rhythmic, scrolling vines, symbolized the eternal cycle of life and the unbroken breath of creation. To gaze upon a wall of such tilework in a place like the Alhambra Palace was to be drawn into a meditative state, to lose yourself in a pattern that suggested a reality far beyond the confines of the wall itself. These ideas and artifacts traveled, luxurious textiles woven with these intricate patterns, along with illuminated scientific manuscripts filled with geometric diagrams, made their way into European courts and monasteries, especially in regions like Spain, where Islamic, Christian, and Jewish cultures coexisted and cross-pollinated for centuries. In places like Cordoba or Toledo, European craftsmen saw a vocabulary of symmetry that was both familiar and astonishingly new. The compass and straightedge they knew could generate these stars and interlocking shapes, but the intent was different. It was less about mapping a fixed hierarchical cosmos and more about evoking an endless, unfolding creation. This cross-cultural fusion quietly expanded the European builder's toolkit. You can see its subtle influence in the stone tracery of late Gothic windows, where geometric patterns become more layered and complex, suggesting infinite repeatability. The elaborate vaulting of certain chapels begins to resemble the crystalline structures of Islamic muqarnas, those stunning honeycomb-like ceilings that seem to dissolve architecture into pure, cascading geometry. Even the decorative borders in illuminated manuscripts start to incorporate interlacing knots and repeating geometric bands that feel distinctly influenced by Eastern design principles. This was not a wholesale replacement of one tradition for another. It was an enrichment, a borrowing of a new dialect for the universal language of form. The European masters still sought to point toward heaven with a spire, but now the walls that supported that spire could also whisper of infinity through the intricate lace of stone. This exchange reminds us that the greatest human projects are rarely born in isolation. The quest for perfect design is a story of curiosity, of trade routes carrying ideas as precious as spices, and of the humble, powerful truth that beauty has always been a conversation. And as this conversation between geometries echoed in stone and parchment, another, more intimate dialogue was taking place, one that sought to balance this grand cosmic order with the delicate, imperfect rhythms of the world just outside the cathedral door. But the symmetry they built was not meant to be seen alone. It was meant to be heard. The master builders understood that divine order was not a silent principle. It had a voice, a resonance that could be felt in the very air, and they designed their stone mountains to become perfect instruments for its song. This is the fifth principle: acoustic symmetry and sonic harmony. The soaring vaults and parallel walls were not just a visual triumph. They were a meticulously tuned sound chamber, engineered to transform human breath and song into something that felt supernatural. Every surface, every curve was calculated to shape the journey of a single note. When a monk in the choir loft began a Gregorian chant, his voice did not simply travel in a straight line to the ears of the congregation. It radiated outward, striking the hard, smooth surfaces of stone pillars and arched ceilings. These surfaces, spaced at precise, symmetrical intervals, reflected the sound waves back in overlapping patterns. The key was reverberation, the time it takes for a sound to fade completely. In a small, damp room, sound dies quickly, feeling flat and immediate. But within the vast stone cathedral, with its high, hard ceilings and long, uninterrupted sightlines, sound was given the space to live. A single, sustained note would bounce and bloom, its echoes layering upon themselves to create a rich, lingering chord that seemed to hang in the air like incense smoke. This was not an accident. It was acoustic architecture. The symmetrical design ensured that these reflections were orderly and consistent, preventing the chaotic muddle of echoes that would occur in an irregular space. The parallel walls created a smooth, rolling return of sound, while the curved surfaces of the vaults helped to diffuse it evenly, wrapping the entire congregation in a uniform blanket of tone. The result was that music performed within this space underwent a miraculous transformation. The pure, monophonic lines of Gregorian chant, when sung into this resonant stone instrument, would naturally gather harmonic overtones. The building itself would harmonize the song, adding a depth and complexity that the human voices alone could not produce. It made a small choir sound like a heavenly host, filling the immense volume with a presence that felt both intimate and immense. For the medieval worshipper, this was the final, overwhelming layer of the experience. They were not just seeing the geometry of heaven in the rose window or walking its map in the cruciform plan. They were now breathing it, immersed in a sonic manifestation of the same perfect order. The visual symmetry of the repeating arches found its echo in the auditory symmetry of the repeating sound waves. The spiritual harmony they sought was now a physical vibration in their chests, a tangible resonance that united the community in a single, shared sensory moment. In this total sensory embrace, the boundary between the individual and the divine, between the earthly song and the celestial chorus, dissolved into a single, harmonious note. The quest for perfect design had found its voice, and it was a chord that resonated through stone, through air, and directly through the human soul. This same profound order was not locked within stone walls alone. It flowed from the master mason's compass into the pages of books, the fabric of banners, and the very symbols of identity. The medieval love for symmetry was a complete mindset, a way of seeing that shaped reality from the grandest cathedral down to the personal seal in a noble's hand. Nowhere is this more intimately visible than in the illuminated manuscript. Here, the sacred text was not merely copied, it was ceremoniously framed. Scribes and artists labored to create a perfect visual harmony on the page, balancing the weight of dark, formal script with the radiant bursts of illustration. The text block itself was often centered, a solid rectangle of authority, but the true artistry blossomed in the margins. These borders were not empty space. They were meticulously ordered gardens of design, filled with symmetrical vines, repeating geometric knots, and fantastical creatures arranged in mirrored pairs. This intricate framing did more than decorate. It created a visual pathway, guiding the reader's eye from the chaos of the outside world into the ordered truth of the scripture. The page became a microcosm of the cathedral itself, with the text as the nave and the symmetrical borders as the structured, protective walls. This training in visual balance was constant and pervasive. Consider the heraldic shield, the medieval logo of power and lineage. Its entire language was built on symmetry. A lion rampant, reared up on its hind legs, was almost always shown in profile, facing left, its form creating a dynamic yet perfectly balanced charge on the shield's field. The eagle displayed, with wings spread wide and head forward, presented a majestic, mirror image symmetry that communicated strength and unwavering authority. These were not arbitrary choices. A symmetrical coat of arms was instantly legible across a crowded battlefield or a bustling tournament ground. It signaled stability, legitimacy, and an ancient, unbroken order. This visual grammar extended to the seals used to authenticate documents, to the layout of formal gardens within monastery walls, and even to the arrangement of figures in tapestries and frescoes. Every day, in countless subtle ways, the medieval person was surrounded by a built environment of balance. Their eyes were conditioned from youth to recognize and find comfort in mirrored forms, repeated patterns, and centered compositions. This omnipresent visual diet of order did something profound. It prepared the public imagination to not just see, but to feel and believe in the grand statements made by architecture. When a pilgrim first glimpsed the twin towers of a distant cathedral rising in perfect balance against the sky, they did not see a strange, abstract geometry. They saw a monumental extension of a familiar principle, a pattern they knew from the pages of their prayer books and the shield of their Lord, now magnified to a heavenly scale. The cathedral's symmetry felt right because it was the ultimate expression of a visual language they already spoke fluently. The master builder's genius was in speaking that common tongue with the most powerful voice possible, using stone and light to tell a story that every eye, trained by 1,000 smaller symmetries, was already prepared to understand. This silent conversation between stone and sound was part of a larger celestial dialogue. The master builders looked beyond their walls and vaults to the grandest symmetrical system they knew, the sky itself. Their quest for perfect design demanded alignment not just with geometric ideals, but with the cosmos. For them, the orderly motion of the stars and planets was the ultimate clockwork of creation, a divine mechanism of perfect regularity. To build in harmony with it was to anchor their work to the very engine of the universe. This is why so many medieval churches and cathedrals are meticulously aligned to true east, not just a general eastern direction. This orientation was a precise astronomical calculation, not a vague gesture. The builders would determine the exact point on the horizon where the sun rose on the feast day of the church's patron saint. On that morning, as dawn broke, a shaft of golden light would be engineered to pass directly through the east-facing windows, striking the high altar with theatrical brilliance. In that moment, architecture captured time. The cyclical, predictable symmetry of the solar year was harnessed to illuminate a specific sacred story, making the building itself a participant in an annual celestial liturgy. It proved that the holy day was not just a date on a calendar, but a point of convergence between heaven and earth, marked in light and stone. This practice whispers of a much older tradition, a deep memory held in the landscape. Long before the Gothic spires, ancient peoples across Europe raised stone circles and megalithic monuments that served as sophisticated astronomical observatories. Sites like Stonehenge are calibrated to solstice sunrises and lunar cycles. While the medieval master mason may not have understood the full science of his prehistoric predecessors, a cultural echo of this practice lingered, the instinct that sacred space must be in conversation with the sky. The cathedral, then, became a kind of successor to the stone circle. It traded the open horizon for an enclosed vault, but the purpose remained, to create a fixed point on earth where celestial symmetry could be witnessed and celebrated. By capturing that specific sunbeam on that specific day, the builders achieved something profound. They made time itself a symmetrical, predictable participant in their design. The chaotic flow of days and seasons was given a focal point, a moment of perfect alignment where the human, the architectural, and the cosmic all spoke in unison. It was the final, triumphant layer of their harmonic vision, proving that the perfect order they sought in their compass drawings was not a human invention, but a reflection of a grand, celestial design written in light across the heavens. But the same geometry that lifted souls toward heaven could also be forged into an unbreakable shield. When the quest for perfect design turned to defense, symmetry became a language of pure, calculated power. In the world of military architecture, those balanced circles and mirrored forms were not about transcendence but survival. This was fortress symmetry, where every elegant proportion served a brutally practical purpose to create an impenetrable form. The ultimate expression of this martial geometry was the concentric castle. Imagine not a single wall, but a series of perfectly spaced rings, one inside the other, like a stone onion. Each ring was a complete defensive circuit, studded with towers at regular, symmetrical intervals. This design presented a uniformly formidable face to an attacker from any direction. There was no weak side, no blind corner to exploit. An assault force that breached the outer wall would find itself trapped in a deadly killing ground, exposed to fire from the even higher inner walls on all sides. It was a geometric trap of devastating efficiency. Every element of this symmetrical plan was a lesson in lethal logic. Look at the arrow loops, those narrow slits in the castle walls. They were not random holes. They were carefully positioned in mirrored pairs and sequences, calculated to provide overlapping fields of fire. From the outside, a wall might seem solid, but from within, those slits created a web of interlocking sightlines, allowing defenders to cover every inch of the approach without leaving a single safe patch of ground. The design of the central keep, or great tower, followed the same ruthless principles. A symmetrical square or circular plan allowed for efficient circulation of defenders during an attack. Staircases could be placed to avoid bottlenecks, and the uniform shape meant clear, unobstructed lines of sight from every window and battlement. There were no awkward, shadowed angles where an enemy could gain a foothold unseen. This martial symmetry sent a powerful, silent message long before any arrow was loosed. The balanced, imposing silhouette of a castle on the horizon was a psychological weapon. It projected order, discipline, and relentless calculation. It told any approaching army that they were not facing a makeshift fort, but a mind, a single, intelligent will cast in stone. The chaos of a siege would break against its perfect, unyielding form. In this context, the quest for perfect design was stripped of all ornament. It was about creating a balanced system where every part supported the other, where every thrust had a prepared counter, and where the harmony sought was not of the soul, but of a perfectly executed defense. The master mason here was a tactician, using the same compass that charted celestial paths to now chart fields of overlapping fire. It proved that symmetry was not solely a spiritual pursuit. It could be the bedrock of earthly power, a cold, beautiful geometry built to ensure that within its walls, life and order would endure against the encroaching storm. The tools that made this celestial conversation possible were humble, yet they held the entire cosmos within their reach. How could a team of medieval workers, without lasers or computer models, translate a master's vision into a perfectly symmetrical mountain of stone? The answer lies in a small, sacred kit of instruments, each one an extension of the builder's mind and faith. The most vital was the mason's cord, a simple length of rope, often knotted at precise intervals. This was their tape measure, their baseline for all earthly dimensions. Stretched taut between two stakes, it established the fundamental lines from which every other angle and curve would spring. Then came the wooden compass, perhaps the most spiritually charged tool in the chest. Its two legs, joined at a pivot, could swing open to any distance, inscribing perfect circles and arcs onto tracing floors or directly onto stone blocks. This tool was the physical embodiment of their core belief that all creation flowed from a single, central point. With it, they could generate the divine geometry that was their blueprint for reality. For ensuring absolute perpendicularity, they used the set square, a wooden triangle guaranteeing flawless right angles, the foundation of stability. And to defy gravity's constant pull, they employed the plumb line, a weighted cord that defined the uncompromising truth of the vertical. This slender, hanging line was a daily meditation on alignment, a silent check that every rising wall was in true conversation with the center of the earth. These tools were not used in isolation. They were guided by remembered geometric theorems, practical knowledge passed from master to apprentice. A team could use a knotted cord to form a perfect 3-4-5 triangle, guaranteeing a square corner for a foundation. They could swing the compass from multiple points to find the exact center of a space or to define the complex curves of a vault rib. This shared, hands-on knowledge meant that dozens of workers, spread across a vast, noisy site, could all execute their individual tasks with a common understanding. The man carving a window frame in the stone yard and the team setting a pillar 50 feet above were guided by the same invisible geometry, replicated through these simple, trustworthy instruments. This rigorous process ensured the symmetry was not a vague aesthetic ideal. It was a mathematical certainty, executed with a discipline that feels almost superhuman today. The plumb line did not allow for almost vertical. The set square did not permit nearly square. Every block was cut to precise angles. Every arch was formed from perfect arcs, because the tools themselves enforced an unforgiving standard of truth. This is why these cathedrals still stand centuries later, their lines as crisp as the day they were laid. The humble cord and compass were not limits on their ambition. They were the very keys that unlocked it, transforming a master mason's dream of celestial order into a physical fact of breathtaking stone. The cathedral's geometry did more than hold up walls and filter light. It directed the very footsteps of the faithful. This was the symmetry of liturgical movement, where the architecture itself became a silent choreographer for the sacred rituals of daily life. The most powerful line in the entire building was not made of stone, but of intention, the longitudinal axis running straight from the great west door to the high altar in the east. This was the processional path, the sacred highway for every major ceremony. On a feast day, you would witness a breathtaking spectacle of ordered motion. The clergy, clad in brilliant vestments, would move in a slow, stately line down this central aisle, their progression a living thread weaving through the static symmetry of the pillars. This was not just walking, it was a kinetic prayer. Each step taken along that axis reinforced the spiritual journey from the worldly realm at the entrance toward the divine presence at the altar. The architecture framed and elevated every movement, turning a simple walk into a profound communal experience. But this choreography was not limited to a single central path. Look to the sides of the nave, where you would find a series of smaller altars nestled in the spaces between the great piers. These side altars were often placed in mirrored pairs, left and right, allowing for multiple masses to be celebrated simultaneously. This symmetrical arrangement meant that the central liturgy at the high altar could be accompanied by a harmonious constellation of smaller, private devotions happening in unison around it. The space hummed with coordinated sacred activity, a symphony of ritual where every note had its place. At the heart of this orchestrated movement sat the choir, often occupying a central position in the crossing, directly between the congregation in the nave and the clergy in the sanctuary. Physically and symbolically, it was the balanced pivot point. From this focal position, the choir's song did not simply fill the space, it unified it. Their chants washed forward over the people and backward toward the altar, binding the laity and the clergy into a single auditory body. The architectural symmetry ensured their voices carried with perfect clarity, making the choir both a participant in and a director of the liturgical flow. Every element of this design served to make the complex rituals of the faith physically intuitive. You did not need a manual to know where to go or how to act. The space itself guided you. The balanced aisles suggested where to stand or process. The centered choir stall indicated where the community's voice originated. The clear axis directed your gaze and your steps toward the focal point of the ceremony. This orchestration reinforced a core medieval ideal that a well-ordered community was a reflection of a well-ordered cosmos. In the cathedral, every individual, from the bishop to the newest initiate, had a place and a role within a visible, harmonious structure. Their movements were not random, but part of a greater, beautiful pattern. To participate was to feel your own small motion integrated into a vast, purposeful dance, a daily reaffirmation that within those walls, and by extension within the faith itself, every step truly mattered. Yet the stones of these cathedrals whisper of an even older order. The medieval master mason's compass traced a lineage that reached back beyond the cloister and the castle, to the sun-baked forums and aqueducts of a fallen empire. The quest for perfect design did not spring from a vacuum. It was built quite literally upon Roman foundations. The Romans were masters of a symmetry born not of mystic revelation, but of imperial power and civic order. Their entire architectural language was one of axiality, balance, and overwhelming proportion. Walk through the ruins of a Roman forum, and you move along a central axis flanked by perfectly mirrored colonnades. Enter a temple like the Pantheon, and you stand beneath a dome of sublime geometric perfection, a hemisphere resting with impossible grace upon a cylinder. The basilica, with its central nave and side aisles, provided the very blueprint for the Christian church. Even the colossal amphitheater, like the Colosseum, is a lesson in radial symmetry, organizing thousands of spectators around a central stage of spectacle and authority. This was symmetry as a tool of civilization, a way to impose rational order upon the world and to project an image of eternal, unshakable strength. When the Western Roman Empire fragmented, its knowledge did not vanish. It was preserved in crumbling structures that still dotted the landscape and in precious manuscripts safeguarded in monastic libraries. The first great medieval building style, the Romanesque, was a direct and humble air. You can see the family resemblance in the stout, rounded arches, the thick walls punctuated by rhythmic rows of windows, and the overall sense of grounded, earthly mass. A Romanesque church feels like a fortress of faith, its symmetry solid, sober, and defensive, a direct inheritance of Roman engineering pragmatism. But then, something extraordinary happened. Medieval builders did not simply copy these old forms. They began a conversation with them. They took the Roman arch and asked a new question. What if this curve could point not just across a space, but upward toward heaven? This question led to the pointed Gothic arch, a simple geometric adjustment that redistributed weight more efficiently and allowed walls to climb toward the light. They took the Roman basilica plan and infused it with a new spiritual narrative, turning the axial walk into a journey of salvation and lining that path with windows of holy story. They looked at Roman proportions once used to celebrate an emperor's glory and repurposed them to chart the dimensions of the divine. This was not a break with the past, but a profound transformation. The medieval craftsmen stood on the shoulders of Roman giants, but they were looking at a different horizon. Where Roman symmetry spoke of earthly power and civic virtue, the Gothic builders whispered of spiritual ascent and celestial harmony. They took the inherited language of balance and gave it a new, transcendent vocabulary. This continuity reveals the true nature of their quest. The pursuit of perfect design was never a single, frozen ideal. It was an evolving dialogue across centuries, a slow, patient conversation between generations of builders. Each era listened to the stones left by the last, understood their grammar of form and force, and then reinterpreted that grammar for its own deepest needs. The Romanesque walls spoke of endurance. The Gothic vault answered with aspiration. Together, they tell a story of human ingenuity in constant, respectful conversation with the past, forever reaching with the same timeless tools for a vision of order that would give meaning to their world. This visual language of balance flowed seamlessly from architecture into the very art that adorned it. Walk up to the main entrance of a great cathedral, and before you even step inside, you are met with a sermon carved in stone. The semicircular space above the door, called the tympanum, is a masterpiece of symbolic symmetry. At its heart, you will almost always find a single, central figure, Christ in majesty, seated in judgment or blessing. Radiating outward from this divine center, in perfectly ordered rows to the left and right, are the apostles, the angels, the 24 elders of the Apocalypse. The saved are arranged on one side, moving toward grace, while figures representing those who turned away are positioned on the other. This is not a chaotic scene of the end times, but a meticulously balanced diagram of cosmic justice. Every figure has its mirrored counterpart, creating a visual equilibrium that translates the overwhelming concept of final judgment into a clear, legible order. The symmetry tells you everything you need to know: hierarchy, stability, and the ultimate restoration of divine balance. For a medieval pilgrim, often unable to read the Latin scriptures, this stone tableau was their Bible. They could stand before it and understand the entire narrative of salvation, the central authority of Christ, the supporting role of the saints, and the consequences of moral choice, all through the silent, powerful logic of left and right. This principle governed the illuminated manuscripts read by the clergy as well. In a panel painting depicting the Annunciation, the Virgin Mary is typically shown on one side, the angel Gabriel on the other, with a central architectural element like a column or a window dividing the space, symbolizing the moment the divine entered the human realm. In scenes of the crucifixion, the figure of Mary and John the Apostle are often placed in mirrored poses of grief on either side of the cross. framing the central sacrifice with a symmetry of sorrow and devotion. This artistic symmetry was a form of visual catechism. It organized complex heavenly stories into a format the eye could easily navigate and the mind could instantly remember. The balanced composition created a sense of calm and certainty amidst scenes of drama or mystery. It reinforced the core message that behind every event, even those of profound suffering or joy, was an underlying divine order. This artistic rule ensured that beauty and doctrine were inseparable. The harmony of the design was itself a testament to the harmony of the faith, teaching theology not through words, but through a profound and universal sense of visual rightness that anyone, scholar or peasant, could feel in their bones. That profound sense of order you feel is not just cultural, it is biological. Modern research reveals our brains are hardwired to find symmetry deeply comforting. Faced with a balanced form or a mirrored pattern, our neural pathways light up with recognition and calm. This is because symmetry represents predictability, a promise that the world follows a reliable, understandable rule. It signals safety, efficiency, and health, qualities our ancestors instinctively sought in a mate, a shelter, or a source of food. The medieval builders, of course, had no access to brain scans or cognitive studies. Yet their entire architectural philosophy was a brilliant, intuitive grasp of this psychological truth. They were master psychologists in stone, using form to directly sculpt feeling and guide behavior. Within the sacred space of a cathedral, their goal was to quiet the inner storm. The world outside those walls was one of immense uncertainty, of famine, illness, and conflict. By eliminating visual chaos through perfect geometric repetition, the builders created a sanctuary for the mind. Your eyes are not forced to dart and search. They are gently led along the rhythmic march of columns, upward along the converging lines of vaults toward a source of luminous calm. This reduction of sensory noise had a single, profound purpose: to focus the wandering mind, to turn it inward toward prayer and contemplation. In that perfectly ordered silence, the soul could feel still enough to listen, but the same neural wiring that finds comfort in balance also interprets it as power. Flip the purpose from solace to sovereignty, and symmetry becomes a tool of command. Consider the formidable facade of a royal palace or a great castle gatehouse. Its mirrored towers and centered entrance present an unshakable front. There is no obvious weakness, no flaw to exploit. This visual statement of perfect control triggers a subconscious response of deference and caution. It communicates stability, immense resources, and an authority so absolute it has been carved into the very geometry of the building. To approach was to submit psychologically before a single word was spoken or a gate was raised. This duality reveals the genius of their quest. They were not just following a celestial blueprint. They were engaging with a deep, universal human language written into our biology. Their designs bypassed reason and spoke directly to our oldest instincts, using balanced form to either open the heart in reverence or assert dominance with unanswerable clarity. In every arched corridor and every mirrored hall, they embedded a psychological mastery, proving that the truest architecture shapes not just space, but the very minds that move through it. Yet for other minds, the perfect circle and the balanced square held a different, more secretive promise. Beyond the public theology of the cathedral, a parallel world of thought flourished in quiet studies and guarded manuscripts, where symmetry was not just a reflection of divine order, but a map to its hidden chambers. This was the realm of mystical traditions where geometry became a code. In the cryptic diagrams of alchemy, the quest to transform base metal into gold was mirrored in symmetrical symbols. The most famous is the Ouroboros, the serpent forever consuming its own tail in a perfect, unbroken circle. This was not a mere illustration. It was a profound emblem of unity, of the cyclical nature of creation and destruction, and of the infinite, self-sustaining nature of the cosmos. For the alchemist, this symmetrical shape represented the ultimate goal, the philosopher's stone, a state of perfect balance and completion where all opposites were reconciled. Their workbenches held flasks and furnaces, but their minds were occupied with squares within circles, interlocking triangles of elemental forces, all arranged in a quest for a hidden symmetry at the heart of matter itself. A similar, deeply structured vision of reality emerged from the mystical Jewish tradition of Kabbalah. Its central symbol, the Tree of Life, is a masterpiece of sacred symmetry. 10 spheres of divine emanation, called Sephiroth, are arranged in 3 perfectly balanced columns, connected by 22 paths. This diagram is a blueprint of creation itself, a symmetrical chart describing how the infinite, unknowable divine source stepped down its energy into the structured, knowable world. While mainstream Christian builders would have carefully distanced themselves from overt occult practices, the ideas within these traditions seeped into the intellectual atmosphere of the age. Scholars translating ancient texts in places like Toledo encountered these concepts, and the notion that God had structured the universe according to a knowable, geometric plan resonated powerfully with the Masons' own compass-drawn faith. It contributed to a culture that saw hidden patterns everywhere. The symmetry of a rose window might then be read not only as a symbol of heavenly harmony, but as a kind of puzzle, a geometric lock that, if understood, could reveal deeper truths about the nature of the soul or the architecture of angels. This added a potent layer of hermetic mystery to the practical craft. The master mason, for all his public role as a church builder, could also be seen as a keeper of arcane knowledge, a man who used his tools to inscribe not just buildings but secrets. His perfectly proportioned floor plan might be a public declaration of faith, but to a select few, it could also whisper of a more hidden journey. This shadow tradition reminds us that the medieval quest for perfect design was not a single, unified doctrine. It was a tapestry woven from many threads, public and private, exoteric and esoteric. The same love for balanced form that raised a cathedral to glorify God could also, in a different room, fuel a silent, personal search to find God hidden within the geometry of creation itself. The same principles that lifted a single soul toward heaven could also organize the lives of thousands. The master builder's compass did not stop at the cathedral door. It stepped out into the mud and meadow, plotting the very streets where people would live, trade, and seek community. This was the 9th principle, where the quest for perfect design scaled up to shape the symmetrical city. In an era often imagined as one of chaotic, winding lanes, a powerful counter-movement was born, the deliberate, rational planning of new towns. From the south of France to the Welsh marches, lords and kings founded what were called bastides. These were not organic growths, but instant communities, conceived on a drafting table and stamped onto the landscape. Their layout was a declaration of order, a grid of straight streets intersecting at right angles, centered on a large, open market square. This square was the community's heart, and it was almost always a perfect rectangle or square, surrounded by covered arcades that created a mirrored rhythm of arches and columns. Why this rigid geometry? The reasons were brilliantly practical. A grid plan made the town easy to navigate, to parcel out plots to settlers, and to defend, as militia could move quickly down straight streets to any threatened wall. The symmetrical market square facilitated fair trade with equal access for all merchants, and became a stage for civic life, from proclamations to festivals. The entire design reflected a new ideal, the town as a balanced, efficient machine for living, a direct earthly echo of the celestial order sought in stone. This vision of urban symmetry reached its most ambitious expression in the walled city, where defense and devotion fused into a grand radial plan. Look at a medieval map of a city like Pomonova in Italy. built from scratch in the late 16th century. It is a star, a perfect polygon with 9 bastions from which streets radiate inward like spokes on a wheel, all converging on a central hexagonal piazza. This was symmetry as both fortress and community. The radial streets allowed troops to rush from the center to any point on the defensive perimeter with equal speed, while the central square housed the cathedral and the town hall, the twin seats of spiritual and secular authority. Every citizen lived in a wedge-shaped sector, equal in its relationship to the core. The design left no room for ambiguity. It made the social order visible and tangible, placing each individual within a clear, geometric relationship to power, protection, and the divine. The city itself became a macro expression of the harmonious ideals carved into its cathedral stones. To walk from a crooked, ancient lane into one of these planned towns was to experience a different world, one where human intention had triumphed over accident, where the mind's love for balance had successfully imposed itself upon the earth. This urban symmetry was more than an aesthetic choice. It was a tool of civilization, a belief that by creating an orderly environment, you could nurture an orderly, prosperous, and devout society. The straight street and the central square were promises written in dirt and cobblestone, a vow that even in the bustling, messy business of daily life, a deeper harmony was possible. But the land itself had its own ancient geometry. The master builder's perfect circles and squares, drawn on flat parchment, met their ultimate test not in the sky, but in the unyielding rock and rising tide of the earth. For all their celestial ambition, these architects were forced into a profound and humble conversation with the natural world, a dialogue where the divine plan had to bend to the reality of the ground beneath their feet. Consider the impossible silhouette of Mont Saint-Michel, not as a postcard but as a construction site. Here, the dream of a symmetrical abbey dedicated to the Archangel Michael crashed against the brutal facts of a granite island, lashed by some of Europe's strongest tides. The builders could not level this rocky peak to suit their ideal plan. Instead, they became architectural acrobats. They built upward in staggering, asymmetrical tiers, each chapel and cloister conforming to the unpredictable contours of the rock. The result is a masterpiece of pragmatic faith, where the central axis of the church is not a straight line, but a calculated series of adjustments, a spiritual path literally carved out of a mountain. The symmetry here is not in mirrored wings, but in the exquisite balance achieved between human aspiration and natural law, a building that appears to grow from the stone as naturally as a crystal. This negotiation was constant. Countless churches and cathedrals were built upon sites already considered sacred, places with ancient springs, revered groves, or older pagan temples. To demolish these entirely would be to sever a community's deep roots. The wiser path was incorporation, a spiritual grafting. The builders would often align their new east-west axis to include the old holy well or ancient standing stone, weaving the older power of the place into the new Christian narrative. This created plans that are fascinatingly lopsided to a geometrician's eye. A nave might jog slightly to the left to encompass a sacred spring, or a chapel might be added at an odd angle to honor a site of local pilgrimage predating the church itself. The building became a living parchment with the new, orderly script of Gothic geometry written carefully around the cherished, irregular signatures of the past. Perhaps the most eloquent example of this dialogue is Canterbury Cathedral. Its history is a visible record of adaptation. A devastating fire in the 12th century destroyed the eastern end. The genius of the subsequent builder, William of Sense, was not to simply replicate what was lost, but to innovate within the constraints of the surviving structure. He extended the choir in a breathtaking new Gothic style, but he had to connect it to the older, lower Norman nave. The transition is not seamless. It is a thoughtful conversation between architectural languages. The floor level shifts, the column rhythms change, and the axis subtly turns. Walking through Canterbury is not an experience of perfect, uniform symmetry. It is a journey through time itself, a physical narrative of loss, resilience, and stylistic evolution. These sites reveal the true depth of the medieval quest. It was never a blind imposition of a rigid template upon a passive world. That was the way of an empire, not a community of faith. Their goal was a higher, more difficult harmony, one that listened as much as it dictated. They sought a balance between the ideal geometry of heaven and the given, messy, sacred geometry of the earth. The perfect circle drawn with a compass met the enduring circle of a sacred well. The straight line to the east met the immutable slope of a hill. In the resulting compromise, in those gentle jogs and adaptive forms, we see not failure but a deeper wisdom. The builders understood that true order is not the absence of irregularity, but the graceful integration of it. Their greatest monuments teach us that harmony is not found by silencing the voice of the land, but by weaving its ancient song into a new and more magnificent chorus. Yet the stone mountains of the Gothic age could not contain this quest forever. A quiet revolution was already stirring in the workshops of Florence and the studies of humanist scholars, one that would gently pivot the axis of symmetry from heaven to earth. The medieval master mason's compass, which had charted a path to the divine, was not discarded. Instead, its perfect circle was placed around a new subject, the individual human being. This was the profound shift of the Renaissance, a rediscovery of classical ideals that reframed symmetry not solely as a reflection of cosmic order, but as the very measure of human potential. The source of perfection remained divine, but its most perfect expression was now seen in the mirror. Artists and architects pored over rediscovered Roman texts, like those of Vitruvius, which describe the human body as the model for all harmonious architecture. A man's outstretched limbs could define both the perfect square and the perfect circle, placing humanity literally at the center of the geometric universe. This was a symmetry of empowerment. The balanced facade of a palace was no longer just a shadow of heavenly Jerusalem. It was a celebration of human reason and civic virtue, built to the proportions of an idealized human form. The quest had turned inward, seeking perfection not only in the grand cosmos, but in the very anatomy of the observer. This new vision demanded a new kind of magic on a flat surface. The medieval artist had used symmetry to organize symbolic narratives, arranging saints and angels in balanced hierarchies. The Renaissance artist sought to break through the wall itself, to create a window into a believable world. The tool that made this possible was linear perspective, a geometric system that used mathematical symmetry to construct the ultimate illusion. By establishing a single, central vanishing point on the horizon and drawing all lines of architecture and landscape to converge there, artists like Brunelleschi and Masaccio created spaces with breathtaking depth and order. This was symmetry in motion, a controlled visual force that pulled the viewer's eye irresistibly into the scene, making them a participant in a moment frozen in perfect geometric harmony. The symmetry was no longer just in the mirrored placement of figures, but in the entire constructed space, a rational, measurable world that obeyed consistent, human, understandable laws. In such a painting, every brick in a courtyard, every tile on a floor, followed the relentless logic of converging lines, creating a serene and powerful order that felt both divinely inspired and humanly mastered. This transition marks the moment the torch was passed. The anonymous master mason, the keeper of guild secrets, gradually gave way to the celebrated artist-architect, a figure like Leon Battista Alberti or Filippo Brunelleschi, who was both a theorist and a builder. These men wrote treatises, conducted optical experiments, and saw geometry as a public language of beauty and truth, not a protected craft mystery. Brunelleschi's magnificent dome for the Florence Cathedral is the perfect symbol of this shift. It achieves a sublime, soaring symmetry that would make any Gothic builder nod in respect, but its construction relied on ingenious machines, classical engineering principles, and a bold, individual genius that was celebrated across Italy. The divine source of the symmetry was still acknowledged, but the human mind that harnessed it was now proudly credited. The quest for perfect design had evolved from a collective, devotional project into a personal, intellectual triumph. The sacred geometry did not vanish. It simply found a new home, now serving to glorify both God and the godlike potential of humanity, forever changing how we see our own place within the design. The geometry that once charted a path to heaven now shapes the skyline of our cities. The medieval quest for perfect design never truly ended. It simply evolved, its principles echoing through the centuries to form the very grammar of our modern visual world. This is the 10th principle, the enduring legacy of symmetry, a language so deeply embedded in our culture that we often speak it without realizing we know the words. Look at the sleek facade of a 20th century skyscraper or the elegant layout of a smartphone in your hand. The same foundational ideas of balance, proportion, and harmonious order are at work, directly descended from the master mason's compass and tracing floor. Modernist architects made this lineage explicit. Le Corbusier, one of the most influential figures in modern architecture, developed an entire proportional system called the modular. It was based explicitly on the human form and the golden ratio, that same divine proportion the medieval builders revered. He used this modular grid to design everything from private homes to entire cities, believing that these ancient ratios were the key to creating spaces that were both functionally efficient and naturally beautiful to the human spirit. His work, and that of countless others, proves that the drive to find a universal, mathematical basis for good design is a thread connecting the cathedral builders to the pioneers of the modern movement. This legacy of conveying power through balance remains equally potent. Walk through the capital of any nation, and you will be surrounded by a silent symphony of bilateral symmetry. Government buildings, courthouses, and national monuments almost universally employ mirrored facades, centered entrances, and balanced wings. Why? Because the psychological language established centuries ago still holds true. This visual order communicates stability, impartiality, and enduring authority. It tells us without a single spoken word that this is a place of law and institution, designed to project a sense of calm, unshakable permanence in a changing world. The symmetry that once fortified a castle now legitimizes a state, but the influence flows far beyond architecture and into the fabric of our daily lives. Every time you frame a photograph, you instinctively employ the rule of thirds, a simplification of those sacred ratios, seeking a balanced composition that pleases the eye. Graphic designers use symmetrical and asymmetrical balance to create logos that feel stable and trustworthy, or dynamic and exciting. The clean, intuitive interface on your computer, or the satisfying shape of a well-designed chair, these are all the products of a centuries-old conversation about form and function, about how visual order can create clarity, comfort, and even delight. By tracing these lines back to their medieval origins, we gain a powerful new lens for seeing our own world. That sense of rightness you feel in a beautifully proportioned room, the calm you experience in an orderly public square, the immediate trust a balanced logo inspires, these are not accidental reactions. They are the echoes of a profound and ancient human quest. We are, in a very real sense, living inside the legacy of those who believed that to build with symmetry was to build a better world. Their stones still teach us that in the search for perfect design, we are ultimately searching for a harmony that resonates not just in our eyes, but deep within our shared human nature. That quest for order, spanning from the human heart to the distant stars, leaves us with a profound legacy. Our journey through the mystery of symmetry reveals it as far more than an architectural technique. It was a profound philosophical and spiritual endeavor that defined an entire age. For the medieval mind, a perfect circle was not just a shape, it was a glimpse into the mind of the creator. A balanced facade was not merely pleasing, it was a moral argument made in stone, a declaration that virtue had a geometry and that chaos was not the final word. This drive manifested in countless forms, from the sacred geometry traced on cathedral floors to the ruthless, balanced defenses of a concentric castle. Each was a different dialect of the same universal language, a language of proportion and balance spoken to achieve wildly different ends, to elevate the soul toward heaven or to secure a kingdom on earth. At its core, this multifaceted quest was a single, powerful impulse to mirror the perceived order of the cosmos and the very nature of the divine here in our tangible world. They built to resonate with a harmony they believed was written into the fabric of reality itself, using stone, glass, and space to compose a silent hymn that could guide, protect, and transcend. This was their answer to a fragile and often frightening existence, an attempt to impose a lasting harmony upon the relentless chaos of life, disease, and conflict. They sought to build shelters not just for bodies but for the human spirit, creating spaces where one could feel, if only for a moment, aligned with a grand and beautiful design. That legacy did not crumble with the Gothic age. It simply evolved, its principles seeping into the bedrock of our culture. As you look at the world around you now, start to notice the hidden symmetries. See them in the dignified facade of a courthouse, in the intuitive layout of a well-designed app, in the calming lines of a classic chair. These are not accidents of modern taste, they are the lasting signature of that ancient, relentless quest. The medieval builders handed us a lens, a way of seeing that equates balance with truth, proportion with meaning, and harmony with a deep, almost spiritual sense of rightness. Their stones still whisper that in our search for perfect design, we are ultimately searching for our own place within a coherent universe, a search that continues to shape our deepest sense of beauty, stability, and meaning today. If this exploration of balance and design resonated with you, we would love to hear your thoughts. What symmetries have you noticed in your own world? Share your reflections in the comments below and subscribe to continue unraveling the profound mysteries of history with us.